Welcome everyone. My name's Todd Fraser. I'm one of the co-founders of Osler's CPD Home. Josh Case is the CEO, founder of Go Locum, and he's been inspired by an interesting idea that surfaced on Facebook, which I'll get him to talk in more detail about. But the concept of having some sort of online forum where people could share cases and knock off some of those really hard to get hours in measuring outcomes and reviewing performance. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Josh, who will walk through what inspired this. Josh.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Todd, and welcome everyone to this little session we're putting together, as Todd said, for a couple of reasons, to, I guess, try and get everyone through those trickier parts of CPD as smoothly as possible. And I guess a second aim for this meetup would be to extend medical education to further corners of the workforce that maybe aren't as well served. Obviously in the hospital or in the practice environment, there's lots of, shall we say, accidental access to this type of thing. But I think if we can deliver it a similar type of program in an online way, we might be able to get some other nooks and crannies that we might not have otherwise. So I'll just pop my screens up. Hopefully that all looks okay. In terms of what we're going to run through, obviously I'm going to talk very quickly just about this concept that Todd and I have sort of been brewing together, how it started, what we're going to try and achieve, some of the problems that have arisen because we've had essentially a completely overwhelming response to this. I was expecting maybe, 10 or 20 people. We've had, last count, well over 150 people who've expressed interest, or at least a need to get further into their CPD. So I think there's something here, and we've brainstormed a few ideas that we can get around some of those hurdles, and I just want to talk about that tonight. We've obviously got Todd here, who maybe undersold himself a little bit with Osler. He's done a lot around trying to push this, the CPD changes towards a very sensible direction, trying to build tools to make it accessible and affordable, and really to a new modern standard that make it digestible for the common doctor. So he's also developed a wealth of experience around this kind of thing, and he's a very good knowledge base if you haven't wrapped your head around the changes yet, or are only really sort of getting started around what we need to do. And then at the end, I'll sort of lay out a proposed format for how I think this whole thing could work, and include some action items as well about how we can move this forward and what I want you to do if you want to participate in this thing. And then at the end, we'll have an open forum, bit of feedback. I'm sure, hopefully this presentation will generate some ideas. So please feel free to pop them in the chat or send them via email to me if there's any of this that resonates with you, and we can look to integrate it into how this whole thing works. So just quickly about me, I'm Josh. I'm a PGY5 locum based in Brisbane. I'm a software developer and startup guy. And as a result, I love chess, coffee and basketball. And I'm lacking a clear plan for my 2024 CPD hours. Spoiler alert, as I'm sure many of the people in this chat are. I just wanted to say, I guess I'm no sort of official authority on CPD. I'm not the medical board. I'm trying to work this all out as much as you guys are. So I'm doing my best to provide quality information around the place. If any of this is not correct, please let me know, and we can work it out together. But again, I'm no sort of official authority. I'm just trying to work this out just like you are. And how this started, this was about a week ago now. Someone named Stephanie, who I've only blurted her name out just because I haven't spoken to her about this, and whether she'd be happy with me sharing her name. She had this idea for like an in-person meetup this was in an online forum for locums in Melbourne. And then I had the spontaneous idea, well, what if we made an online version of this? And then basically lots and lots of people were very, very excited about that. And then Todd came along and we started talking about it further. And I'll explain sort of where we've gotten up to. So if we do just some quick maths, so obviously today is the 12th of August. The CPD years is different to the registration year now. So that goes till September. The CPD year now goes January to December. So that means if you start this week and you worked on your CPD every week till the end of the year, or if you were starting from scratch, you'd need 1.25 hours of reviewing performance and measuring outcomes, plus 1.25 hours of education/other, which is a lot. more than likely you've already done some activities that you can count towards your CPD. This is just to sort of illustrate the task that's in front of us. And I guess the first activity that anyone who's looking to fill out their CPD log should do is probably look at what you've already done, what conferences have you been to, what mortality audits have you attended, blah, 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 and put that in your log. And then after that, make a plan to catch up on the shortfall if you've got a shortfall like I am. And that's the purpose of this group. So that brings us to the focus of this group is this idea of reviewing performance and measuring outcomes. And this is the page from the medical board website that describes CPD requirements. And it has a few examples of the types of things that you can use to meet those requirements. And I guess when you first look at it, it's kind of frustrating a little bit sort of how vague or kind of unclear it is. I think once you think about that further, the vagueness actually works as an advantage, because you can then, shall we say, massage things or frame things in how you want to kind of meet the requirements. So the difficult thing about these reviewing performance and measuring outcomes hours, RPMO, as we'll call them, is that they're harder to complete because then you normally need to plan a bit ahead of time. You can't just sort of sit down and plonk out 2 hours on a podcast or an online learning module on OSLA or something like that, just because there's a bit more planning involved. They require participation from other people. So reflection and feedback are like real themes that the medical board are trying to get us to use more liberally in this kind of thing, and to provide higher levels of education and learning. And yeah, they require deliberate effort, especially if you're outside the hospital environment, you're a locum, you're also working in business, or you're doing something else. They don't happen as naturally as they do in kind of the hospital or practice setting. And so in terms of the principles for the group, the goal of this is to help everyone in the group get their RPMO hours using a crowdsourcing model to make it as seamless and I guess easy to create these serendipitous opportunities for everyone to get these hours. And then, as I said, to deliver professional development via a new medium and get to new corners of the workforce, people on maternity or paternity leave, people working in business. I think someone before the call mentioned they were working in medical publishing, wanting to keep their license. So there's atypical domains, let's say, people working in all the nooks and crannies of the workforce, independent of their geographical location, specialty, employer, employment model, stuff like that. Okay, so in terms of who that's for, these are what my initial thoughts are. There's no hard or fast rules, At a high level, everyone's welcome. Everyone who's willing to participate and contribute is absolutely welcome. It is designed with people, or my concept of this is designed with people outside the hospital practice walls in mind. So generalists, CMOs, locums, part-timers, maternity, paternity leavers, people working fractionally in other domains, as I've mentioned, admin, business, teaching, medical publishing, whatever. Essentially, people who don't have convenient access to workplace performance evaluations and eminent meetings on a regular or frequent basis. Related workplace-based activities, audit meetings, stuff like that. Who is this not for? I guess, again, I'd reiterate that everyone is kind of welcome if they're willing to participate, contribute, stuff like that. But I think there's a few subsections who it won't serve very well. So if you're, a highly specialized clinician who wants very technical CPD deep in the technical weeds of your specialty, you're probably just better off going elsewhere if that's really the content that you want, feedback on, extubation technique or really kind of the really gritty, nitty gritty technical weeds of your specialty. So you could probably go elsewhere for that. You could also, if you wanted to, I guess, make a branch of what we are doing. If we agree to a setting of a bunch of guidelines, let's say in this community group umbrella, you guys could have a spin-off if you wanted, anesthetics or psychiatry or obstetrics or whatever, and make it a smaller thing. And then you could go into the technical weeds there, and maybe that would make more sense. And then the other thing is, I guess, people who want to deliver didactic medical education. So didactic, referring to sort of that lecture style, sort of like you think about the lectures you'd get in medical school. An example would be a lecture on hyponatremia without a substantial reflective element. Again, that's likely better found elsewhere. And also to really, if we get technical, to get the RPMO hours, there's this sort of reflection angle or measuring of outcomes angle that you really have to hit. And a didactic lecture doesn't necessarily, strictly speaking, hit those hours. And as I said, we had very significant interest in a program like this, but it does lead to some issues, both ethical and practical. So first and foremost, obviously the easy one to talk about is privacy. And I guess being outside of the hospital walls implies that there's no implicit consent to share the health data from the health service. Obviously morbidity and mortality meetings are kind of protected content, and the hospital are generally very happy for them to go ahead inside their walls because they can kind of control who gets access to the data. And it's at the end, it's all about improving the hospital service. But I guess if we don't necessarily have that implied consent, it's probably a higher threshold of privacy that we would need to hold ourselves to in preparing and presenting these meetings. And as we all know, Medical Australia is very, very small. There's a very, very, very high likelihood of like someone in the call knowing the patient, knowing the doctor. Maybe they were on that shift that day, being on the other side of that, the referring doctor, stuff like that. It's just enough coincidences that have happened in my short career that I'm confident at some point this would happen. And then, I guess we don't, I'm checking everyone's APRA number when they join the group, but, that's not there's no guarantee about who would be in this call. And we know from experiences with other online communities, there's no real way to basically exclude non-medical people. I'm thinking about people like journalists or potentially members of the public, or, really anyone could get into a call and could theoretically misuse the information in any number of ways. So we need to be extra careful, again, that higher standard of privacy than we would even maybe in the hospital M&M meeting. And again, that point about who's participating in the calls. So here are some things that I think we should have in mind moving forward. Again, open to more ideas and suggestions around this. So obviously, as we would in any M&M meeting, we need to really anonymize the cases, including the sites, the states, any identifiable information, when it happened, and probably have a higher privacy threshold than we would have in a regular meeting. So even if you throw some furfies in there, put the wrong, I don't know, really just, this needs to be held to a high standard. I think I've harped on that enough. APRA registration checks for participants, which I'm chipping away at the background. If a presenter is particularly concerned about a specific case and how it could, maybe have medico-legal consequences back on their HHS, as we call it in Queensland, or your local health district, as you call it in New South Wales, you could maybe look to get consent from the Med Super or an equivalent body if that, probably the presenter is the person who's at most at risk. So getting consent is one way that we could sort of sidestep those issues in addition to doing the other things. Obviously allow plenty of time to pass for the case. It's just sort of, it feels lower risk, doesn't it? If it's, particularly if it's medico-legally sensitive. And don't present high-profile cases in the media, cases that are getting significant medical legal attention. You could also create hypothetical cases based on your experience or your experiences of another doctor, or sort of create this hybrid, almost like a narrative of storytelling, if you will, or fictional storytelling around the experience to capture the idea, to capture the central error that the case, or the central issue about the case, without having a real case about real patient information on the table. And then, substitute material. So rather than using the patient's actual scans, try and find an open source one on Radiopedia that demonstrates the same findings or the same error or the same issue, and of course, providing relevant credits as following the Radiopedia policy, stuff like that. And then the other one is, to potentially use information that's already publicly available. So one that I really like is the idea of doing a reflection on a coroner's case. So I'll talk a bit about it at the end, but you can there's a big library of coroner's cases that you can just go and read. It's actually fascinating, really good for medical education. But I think, we could have a thing where people take a case, read through it, present the facts, try and weave in some reflections of their own practice, of what they were or weren't doing, and sort of make a recommendation about what we could learn from the case. And then I think that would be absolutely satisfy the reviewing performance or measuring outcomes criteria, at least from my point of view. Other issues around, one of my colleagues raised a really good point around having, a psychologically sound and supportive environment. So, knowing that the audience is potentially large and broad, how do we make sure that, people are treated respectfully and, not constructively criticized, I guess, rather than, attacked for mistakes that were made or errors in their judgment and so forth. And then the other thing is there's probably going to be quite a big skill gap and experience gap between a lot of practitioners. If you've just joined the call, Todd, during the introduction, mentioned there should be a poll that will pop up. So please complete that if you haven't done that. That just helps us understand the types of doctors that we're really dealing with and what you really want to get out of this. But we're anticipating quite a wide skill gap, and that could potentially lead to non-constructive feedback. Let me put it that way. Yeah, so in terms of mitigating this, I think I'd love to come away with some sort of community guidelines or just loose framework that we could have in place for people who join these calls. And then if necessary, certainly if if this is a sustained program with regularly having large attendances, then we probably do need some sort of moderation, like almost like a volunteer moderator, just to kind of maybe reframe. I appreciate we're all adults here, but when there's strangers across the internet, I don't know, there's potential there. And the last thing we want is people not to participate or not want to participate because they feel like they're going to be butchered. Okay, with the ethical issues out of the way, there's some practical issues as well. Directing the scope, as I've kind of already touched on, specialists can go elsewhere. Or what I like perhaps more would be, in the interests of inclusivity, would be to encourage content creation around themes that tie us all together. So, there's this obligation to make our CPD relevant to our scope of practice. So can we tie in things like medical error and near misses, like that, almost ubiquitously, depending, regardless of where you work, you're likely to encounter issues like, as we know, the systems we operate in we're doing our best to make them safe, but they're unsafe in so many ways. So medical error, near misses, working in unfamiliar remote locations. So that's particularly more for like the locums and the generalists who are moving around, working with a new team in areas with high staff turnover, interpersonal communication or miscommunication, cultural barriers, workforce issues like burnout or skill divide or communication. And then at the interfaces of the hospital system. So, at the referral and inter-hospital transfer process, are you in the tertiary center? Are you in the, secondary center? Or, are you in the community making a referral? And did the information get through? What was the feedback? Are you the other way around? Are you the GP with a patient landing in your lap without a discharge summary? I think focusing on the interfaces allow us to include it becomes relevant to multiple types of practitioners' scope if we focus on things like this, regardless of what specialty you belong to and so forth. And then just quickly administering the streams. So we've had more than 150 people express interest in this. Generally, if you want to have 100 people in a stream, you need a commercial software license. So many thanks to Todd, who sort of came out of the woodwork and sort of said, we've got this streaming room we can use. And obviously there's a natural fit there with his program in Oslo, which he's going to talk about in about 5 minutes. And a bit of sort of planning around that. And in the short term, I guess that's not too much of a worry, getting this thing going. But, moderating and organizing the streams, and then time zones and schedules are another big problem as well. So I think, we've had people from WA express interest, and they're probably still in the middle of their working day as we have this call. So we probably need to scatter these calls and have them at different times if we're trying to cater to a range of people. And the lecture recordings, certainly in the short term, are probably not too feasible. Obviously, today is different because there's nothing juicy or scandalous or clinical in this call. But I guess there's some issues I might have to think very carefully before we started recording and publishing these calls due to the previously mentioned privacy concerns. And then I guess, I don't know, I'm not sure if watching another static video is what the medical board had in mind when they were saying you need to participate in reflection for this. Again, I'm not the medical board and I'm not going to be a stickler about it, but that's not necessarily what they had in mind in terms of participating in reflection. Okay, I might drop out now and I'll introduce Todd. He's an intensivist from Queensland. He's a medical educator and the founder of Oslo. And as I mentioned, he's threw his hat in the ring to give us a hand with all of this. And he's going to talk a bit more about an overview of CPD, what CPD homes are, a little bit about Oslo. If you haven't got one yet, there's an opportunity there for you for a partnership there. I'll leave it to Todd.
Thank you, Josh. So yes, again, if you haven't finished the poll, if you wouldn't mind just popping on there and just leaving a little bit of information about yourself, that would be very much appreciated. Now, from the poll, it looks like 100% of the people who have answered so far are a member of a CPD home, which is fantastic. One thing we have noticed is that there's still a lot of people who haven't been able to, haven't joined, haven't had the awareness of what's going on to this point. So that is a bit of a concern that there's a lot of your colleagues out there who are still unsure of what they need to do. But certainly the interest that we've seen, as Josh was alluding to, indicates that there is a big issue here. A lot of people are struggling with reviewing performance and measuring outcomes. Can you see the presentation there okay?
Yep, that looks great.
So just in brief, the requirements this year are that you join a CPD home. So in previous years, you were able to self-manage your CPD. That's no longer an option. You now need to join a CPD home. That's for 2024. When you sign your registration sometime over the next 2 months, you'll be asked whether you complied with CPD requirements for last year, which means that you will need to either have complied with the 2016 or 2023 guidelines, both of which effectively are saying, did you do 50 hours worth of CPD in 2023? And I'm sure all of you will answer yes. In 2024, however, you're going to have to nominate a CPD home. And so when you fill out your registration, you're going to have to select one of the CPD homes. And hopefully many of you have chosen Osler. Once you start working with your CPD home, you're going to have to do a CPD plan, which is a mandatory requirement. You'll then need to do 50 hours worth of activities, complete any program level requirements. So program requirements are unique to each different CPD home, and then complete any specialty high level requirements if you want to be registered as a specialist by APRA. I'm not sure how many people that applies to on this call, but there are specific colleges, if you are applying to be registered as a specialist, for example, as a general practitioner, you will also be required to do a CPR course every 3 years. So those specialty level requirements only apply to specialists. At the end of the year, you'll need to reflect on your plan as well. That's a mandatory component of the process. But the bit that's really getting people is the measuring outcomes and reviewing performance. So what you need to do is a minimum of 25 hours of those two activity types combined, with a minimum of 5 hours of each. Now, I think the key here is that there is a lot of grey in this process. It's not entirely straightforward, and a lot of the activities that you'll see in Josh's list do merge and overlap. And I think that's the major reason why the medical board has allowed that combination of both, so that it doesn't matter so much which one they go into. The most important thing here is that the medical board are encouraging us to do activities that reflect on what we do and how we do it and how well we do it, rather than just focusing on educational activities. So hopefully that's clear. 25 hours minimum combined, with a minimum of 5 hours of each of them, as you can see there. You can do 12.5 hours, or you have to do 12.5 hours of educational activities, which adds up to 37.5, and then the remaining 12.5 you can choose to put in any category that you want. So the big question that seems to be asked most frequently is why? Why are we making these changes? So if you go looking for the evidence base for all of this, it is patchy, but it is there. You'll often see people in public forums saying things like there's no evidence for this. That's not true, but there aren't any randomized controlled trials, and there never will be. Just the scale of those types of things will make that impossible. When we look at what sort of educational activities result in a change in clinician behaviours, what's been found repeatedly is that static type mediums where you're listening to a presentation or you're reading some sort of information handout, they don't change behaviours particularly well. What does change behaviour is an interactive, dynamic type learning activities, most importantly with what's generically known as feedback. What do I mean by that? It's where there's an action You measure the impact of that action, you reflect upon it, and you improve. That cycle, that virtuous cycle of quality improvement, is what drives learning most effectively. The other thing that's come out in all of this is that an interesting tidbit that the medical board put in its documentation is that the preponderance of evidence suggests that we are not that good at being able to estimate where we are in terms of our performance. So just as a quick illustration of this, imagine that you're in a big room right now. I'm going to do an exercise. Put your hand up if you drive a car. So most hands will go up. Thank you, Josh. Now, keep your hand up if you're in the bottom 25% of skilled drivers on this conference call. Now, there's going to be people who are genuinely questioning that, but the reality is that most people have got no idea where they sit on the spectrum because you don't have a benchmark, and that makes it very difficult for you to understand where you need to focus your efforts on self-improvement. You might be doing perfectly well, you just don't know, but you might also be falling behind in some areas. Now, if we give you some information about yourself, so let's say that if you were born in January, February, or March, then you have had an accident in the last 12 months, and people who have had an accident in the last 12 months are more likely to have an accident in the next 12 months. Now, that information has given you some context to how you evaluate your own performance. But if I then said everyone born from April to December had 5 accidents in the last 12 months, now you've got some information about your cohort and you understand where you sit. So these 2 bits of information about how you're performing and how everybody else is performing gives you context that helps you to interpret how you're doing. And that's where this concept of informed self-assessment is coming from. So the way I think about it is in this reflective process, you've got 3 elements. Firstly, you've got the substrate, which is the information set that you're going to use. There's the analysis, and then there's the outputs. Now, if your output that you're after is about outcomes for patients, then we can tend to use patient data and use a numerical analysis, and that's what we refer to as audit. But if you're looking at things like softer skills, which is a term that I dislike intensely, but things like communication and empathy and those sorts of things, we can use other forms of data, and it might be narrative data, and we can do qualitative assessments, and they're things that we call feedback or peer review. And then if you want to look at the processes of care, you can use operational type data and do different sorts of analyses on that in things that we call debriefing, those types of things. What's important here is the middle bit, the analysis bit, which is the reflective component, and that's tying all of these different activities together to form the basis of our learning. Now, it's an extremely effective way of learning, but it's not without its challenges. And one of the most important is that it's quite confronting. None of us as clinicians like to know where our gaps in our abilities are. And I think that's really important. And the other thing is that it can be quite challenging to acquire that sort of data. It takes effort to be able to do it. So there's 3 things that you can really measure in broad brushstrokes. The first is outcomes, and that's probably the thing we're most intent on knowing. But sometimes it can be hard to do that. So you can also measure processes and resources. And I'll give you an example, right? So I'm an intensive care physician. One of my core jobs is putting in central lines. So I could look at a core outcome, which is CVC infections. I want to know how often I'm causing harm with the CVCs I put in. But for some other outcomes, it can be a bit more challenging, and you might review the process. So in this case, how well do I stick to my infection control practices? I could audit that instead. And then thirdly, if I can't really get that sort of data, I could look at my resources. How many do I put in? How risky are the patients that I do this for? And because that's then going to provide me with some more context and information. And they're probably descending in terms of importance, but it shows you that there's multiple options for measuring what's important. The sort of things that we can measure in terms of outcomes are things like audits, case discussions that are focusing on the overall outcome of care, higher end level reviews, things like root cause analyses, morbidity, mortality meetings, etc., all focus on what actually happened to the patient. They're considered measuring outcomes. Whereas reviewing performance is looking more at the way we deliver care. Things like feedback, self-reflection, assessments of your practice by a peer, by a supervisor, whatever it might be, and also falling into this practice enhancement type activities. And most importantly, your professional development plan, which you need to do as part of this, as I mentioned earlier, also automatically counts for 3 hours of reviewing performance, because as part of developing a plan, you have to look at how you're going. So what's the right thing to measure for you? I think that is the key. None of us sitting here today can tell you what you should be measuring. We can make suggestions, of course, but ultimately it comes down to you. What you want to be measuring is something that's important to you. So for me as an intensivist, again, one of my most important jobs that I do is communicating with families and communicating bad news. I feel like when I'm doing that well, I'm doing a good job. So surveying and getting feedback from family members that I deal with is an important thing to me. And that's one of the things that I choose to measure. So ask yourself, how do you know that you're doing a good job? If you can identify some of these things, you can then start to work out how you're going to measure them most effectively. And different tools will be good for different things. Importantly, it does not necessarily need to be specific to you. For example, I could do an audit of my whole unit's approach to preventing DVTs. That's an acceptable thing to do. It doesn't even have to be something that you work in. So you can do reviews of cases that are not actually handled by your hospital, by your work unit, whatever it might be. So those sorts of things count. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be about you. It also doesn't have to have a hard statistical outcome, and it doesn't need to be benchmarked against anyone else's data. Right? So they're really important. What's important is that you're measuring what's important to you and trying to identify ways to improve your practice. In terms of recording it, no matter what forum you choose to record it in, you want to be initially stating why you did it and how you did it, so you've got an understanding of what you've done, and then what you've learned and got out of it and how you're going to change your practice going forwards. And a little reminder there, just to make sure that the documentation that you provide will stand up if you do happen to get selected for an audit at the end of the year. There are some sneaky shortcut ways to get some of these hours too. I can't speak for other CPD homes, but certainly with Osler, if you complete your performance development plan, that'll automatically count for 3 hours. In our logbook, if you log cases and procedures, you'll get additional 0.1 hours for every case and every procedure that you do. There's a self-reflection journal, you'll automatically get half an hour for those. Sending feedback requests to people from our system. So if you record, for example, a self-reflection and you want to get somebody to give you some feedback on that, you can do so. Every time you do, you'll get an extra 15 minutes of time under reviewing performance. And also for educational activities, adding a scratch note will get you another 0.1 hours. And so you can quickly see that how if you did half a dozen cases a week, got feedback on 3 of them, did a self-reflection and got a little bit of feedback, then you're going to start to add up those hours reasonably quickly. And it is important to be making progress all the way through the next couple of months, because the time will disappear quickly. And as Josh said, you need a bit of time to be able to get some of these things done. Josh, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks for that, Todd. That was great. Yeah, I think even hearing you run through it, it sounds a lot more clear and makes a lot more sense even to me. And I've been looking into this, so thank you for that. Okay, I might just pop back to my slides for a minute, unless anyone has any other questions or anything they want to throw in at this point. And I'll talk just briefly about how I think this could work in light of the requirements that Todd's run through, the issues that I've raised previously. And then I've also got a few ideas for the types of things that we can, or some ideas for the types of things that we could, the presentations that we could make and then share with each other and build feedback in a way to remotely, but also very genuinely complete the hours in a way that makes sense and makes us all better clinicians. Because yes, we have to meet our requirements, but if we can do it in a way that actually furthers our practice as well, then we should aim for that, I think. So the kind of, as I've hinted to, this idea is around crowdsourcing the content for the reviewing performance and the measuring outcomes. And by getting feedback from each other's clinicians, from other clinicians, we can, do it in a genuine and authentic way. And just thinking back to that quick math slide, if you're starting from scratch, it's probably going to be very hard to just come to these meetups and get all of the hours that you need. So make sure you're engaging with your CPD home, make sure you're doing modules on OSLA, make sure you find, doing those things that he said, logging cases, all that stuff, and sort of build this stuff up over time. And remember that the time researching and preparing and collecting your data and preparing your presentation, all of that time counts because it's it's contributing to the process of that action, feedback, learning kind of loop that that Todd mentioned before. I propose that, we put together presentations, if you can get in touch, I think in the short term, just if you have a presentation ready to go or a case that you really want to present or any of the things that I'm about to talk ready to go, if you get in touch with us, we can talk about, maybe when we could schedule the next session, hopefully in the next week or two, if we've got some really keen people to smash their hours out soon. I think we should maybe try and aim for 2 presentations on a night or on a session. So that would work out to be going for about an hour. That person could speak for about 15 minutes, and then we could have 10 minutes either side of that for question and answer, further discussion, people maybe from the audience sharing their experience, stuff like that. Really get that reflection angle going, and potentially, we'll work out what we do with scheduling. I think in the short term, it'll just depend on when the presenters are available, and we can publish a time both in the Facebook group and via the mailing list. And when the presenters are available, if other clinicians can come, then great. If not, maybe they can catch the next one. I think that's really the best that we can do in the absence of being able to have everyone available at the same time every week, and in the absence of lecture recordings. You share the presentation with your colleagues, promote discussion, get feedback, avoiding the didactic teaching, really looking to bring the reflective angle that Todd mentioned is so important in terms of having quality learning. And I've got some ideas coming. And then, claim the CPD hours for the presentation, the sharing, the reflection, the participation in the whole process as it's relevant to your scope of practice. So in terms of just a few ideas, this is not exhaustive, and it's literally just a few things I brainstormed today. If we're aiming for that reflective angle, that measuring outcomes angle, as I said, we can have a coroner's case where you could pick out a coroner's case, pull out the key themes, tie it into your own practice, maybe even fold that into some sort of audit of your own department and how they're handling that theme that came out. That's, I think that would be really interesting. I think, as I said, the cases themselves are fascinating to learn from. I think that could be actually a really interesting way to have the CPD sessions as well. I think that would be fascinating to watch and listen to. And maybe just get in touch if you are going to do a coroner's case, because then we can make sure there's a nice spreading of content around that stuff. You could do a peer feedback study. I think Todd mentioned doing one with the patient families and the patients themselves, and then a reflection on the implications for your own practice. And I think that would also naturally lead into discussion around how other practitioners deal with the issues that your feedback audit raised, things like that. And I'm coining this term the honeypot method, which I'll talk about in a second. That's a way that you can get patient feedback or peer feedback anyway. Present an audit of your own practice or of your own department, make general recommendations based off that. You could also, one of the big areas is quality improvement. So that's under measuring outcomes, so contributing to quality improvement projects, pushing the field forward, making your department safer, better. So things like handover guide. I'm thinking more junior level because that's like where my head's at. Handover guides for how the department runs, especially if there's a lot of turnover. The time spent writing that and creating that is a quality improvement project. So could or changing the way a clinic works, making it more efficient. The time you spend doing that, if you write that into a summary and share that, I think that will promote good ideas, promote good practice, and that's measuring outcomes. That's one of the examples they list. Obviously cases with errors, adverse outcomes, near misses, remembering that sort of high threshold for patient privacy and information privacy. Presentations about departments or cases with sociocultural challenges. There's also that requirement to have some part of your CPD that addresses I think there's professionalism in there, and there's also some sort of cultural angle to it as well. So that could be, I'm thinking about things maybe in remote communities, or maybe even overseas, or in a certain urban sub-centers where there's a certain population, concentration of a certain population, learning about their culture. Is it Indigenous? Is it otherwise? Learning about the language they use, things like that could be awesome. Obviously, leading, writing, analysing reports on healthcare outcomes. That's one of the examples the medical board has on their website. So if you've published a paper, or you could even go to a journal, find an article that talks about healthcare outcomes, fold it into your own practice, share recommendations, promote discussion, almost like a journal club, remembering, not being too didactic or clinical about it. But that's another idea. I think if you've attended a conference or a course, especially if it's changed your practice, and comparing your practice before to after that, or before or after the conference, or how well did your practice adhere to the standards that were spoken in the course. That's by definition reviewing performance, and sharing that with the group could be great. And another one I just had, I think when Todd was talking, he was talking about getting feedback from the patient families. Well, I think for people who write lots of letters or discharge summaries, or clinical letters, or really any written documentation, you have the option there of putting a feedback link there. And for other clinicians, other members of the community, general practice, the patient themselves, anyone who sees that, who reads it, could give you some feedback about how clear it was, how timely, did it make sense, all that kind of stuff. And now that I think about it, hospitals should probably institute that in general, with all the problems they have with quality discharge summaries and stuff like that. And again, so this is not exhaustive. This is the type of thing that I think we should all try and crowdsource and bring to the table to share and help each other through these hours. And remembering the ethical and practical issues that I've already mentioned above. Okay, this is my last little section, and then we'll go to a town hall. This is a way that you can, I think a really simple and fun way to try and get peer feedback is you go to Google Sheets and you make a questionnaire about your own practice. And again, as Todd said, there's no, I can't tell you exactly what to put. It's got to be relevant to your scope of practice and what you do. But things like reliability, approachability, how you manage your time, how much they enjoy working with you, your documentation standards, whether they would have you as their doctor, stuff like that. And you could target it to any number of people, senior doctors, peer doctors, other registrars or whatever, allied health, nurses, administrators, cleaners, anyone in the ward, right, or anyone in your service. Once you've made your survey, you can turn it into a QR code. So there's 101 free places you could do this, like QR Code Monkey is one place you could go. I just found that randomly Googling, and make a QR code. And then you can turn it into a poster like this. And then what you've got to do is attach it to your honeypot, which in this case is a box of favorites, with the QR code on there. You plonk that in the tea room, and then just wait for unsuspecting victims to get caught by your CPD survey. And then hopefully over a week or two, you'll get some real, hopefully especially if you put some qualitative questions up there, hopefully you'll get some interesting gems that you might be able to write into a reflection or a summary that you could then come to peer CPD and share and say how your practice has changed, share some gems that you've learned with the rest of the group, and claim all of that for hours. So claim the preparing the quiz, claim the leaving the Venus trap on the tea room, claim the time you spent analysing and writing up the report, preparing your presentation for this, and sharing it going forward. You could get probably a couple of hours of that, to be honest with you. So that's the take-home messages, and these are things. That's basically everything I've got. If you want to be involved, make sure you join the Facebook group that's in the email. Make sure you've got a CPD home, so sign up to Oslo or your college or whatever. I want people to start thinking about a 15-minute presentation that they could make and share with the rest of the group. Get in touch with us, through any means, email or other means, to talk about when you could maybe present it. And then, hopefully we can get through this RPMO thing as smoothly as possible by the end of the year without too many issues. So that's pretty much the end of my prepared section of the talk. So I guess maybe I'll just have a quick look in the chat and see if that's been discussion provoking at all, or if anyone has any questions or further suggestions that they want to throw into the mix about how this could work. Otherwise, we've been going for 45 minutes now. We can probably call that a day.
So we'd love to hear your views. Josh, that was fantastic. Thank you. If anybody is interested in contributing their thoughts, just click the raise hand button at the bottom of your browser, and I will hopefully figure out how I can allow you to chat. So just heard from Stephanie, who's more than happy. She's been a bit indisposed at the moment, but she's happy to post her thoughts about it in the Facebook group that Josh mentioned just a moment ago, which is fantastic. Thank you. So I guess the biggest issue that I see is the privacy one and how we deal with that. It's very difficult, I think, to control who can enter into a forum like this. That's one of my concerns.
Yeah.
I think we could try to explore a waiver as a concept, but again, I think that's probably going to be a bit patchy.
Yeah.
So some of the ideas that we were throwing around included, as you mentioned, Josh, the ability to review someone else's case, to review a case study that's in the literature, a coroner's case that's already publicised, or potentially get some sort of permission from the originating hospital or wherever it might have been. What do people think about those options in terms of what you would like to explore?
Yeah, I think just on that note, Todd, I completely agree. I think there's basically no way we can proceed without assuming that the audience it's a public forum. There's pretty much no way that we can have that, regardless of how many waivers or registration checks we do. So I think it just needs to be really clear to every presenter that this could be on the front page of the Herald Sun the next day. So, and unfortunately, that does have, it would be naive to say that isn't going to have consequences for the types of things that we can do. But it's just I think it's just the reality of this forum. It just is. Yeah.
Yep.
I can see Nathan has said maybe 15 minutes is a fairly long time. Do we think we'd better serve doing multiple shorter presentations? Conceivably, to be honest with you, I think that's going to be a bit of a trial and error type situation. Yeah.
Just George, one issue you mentioned there about if you don't present, it doesn't end up being a CPD. No, that's not true. You can certainly, if you're a passive participant in a process like this, you can more than claim it for your CPD under those categories. So that's all good.
I probably skipped over the slide a little quickly. I guess what I meant is that if you, it's going to be difficult to hit all your hours just by passively participating in the group, is what I meant. So if you prepare your presentation, you can claim those hours too. So that will make it easier to everyone to get through if we all make presentations, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, great point. Excellent point.
Looks like people like the idea of a coroner's case.
One of the things that you can do for your CPD is self-audit. So I don't know about other CPD homes, how they manage this, but we have set up our logbook to effectively self-record the number of hours that you spend recording the procedures and patients that you do. So every time you put something into your logbook, you're effectively forcing that information through your cortex again, and that reinforces the learnings that you can have from that. So for us, it's an automatic process. Every patient that you see and every procedure that you add to it will automatically generate time in your logbook under an amalgamated entry in your CPD diary. So I'm not sure whether anybody else does that or how they're handling that. But you can do, you could do it in a spreadsheet if you wanted to, and then claim it as an activity. That would be just as valuable. It's just from our perspective, it makes it a lot easier if it automatically does so. Yeah. So this question about how to deal with getting these sorts of hours when you're a locum comes up frequently, as you can imagine. And
Yeah.
I'll, I'll put a little shield up. It wasn't us that came up with these rules,
Yeah.
but we're responsible for administering it and trying to help people to get through it. And it is challenging. There are more than a few edge cases where people struggle to get these hours.
Yeah.
So I guess, it's hard because I'm not in your situation, but try to come back to what I said before, which is what's important to you. How do you know that you're doing a good job? You know, is it the people that you work with at your locum place of employment that, give you feedback? Is that what's important to you, that you feel like that the people you're working with you're doing a good job? Is it that you are doing the procedures that you do well? Or maybe if you're not doing any procedures, are there other things about your practice that you can measure? Self-reflection is a really important component of this process. Remembering that you already get 3 hours of reviewing performance just for doing your PCDP or your CPD plan. So you've only got 2 hours of reviewing performance to go. But if you're doing regular self-assessments in the form of self-reflections, then you can easily, get more time. And you're only really trying to achieve 25. So it should be achievable if you can do that fairly regularly. The other thing, as I mentioned, is automatically sending feedback requests to people. So we have two bits for this. One is that we've developed a pack that you can download from Osler that gives you all of your patient surveys and colleague surveys and whatever you like. And you can do it that way as a formal feedback process. But the other thing that you can do is just send out feedback on a case or a procedure that you've done or a reflection that you've done. And every time you get that back, you'll get another 15 minutes. So it's another way of getting that time. But in addition to that, it's almost incentivizing exactly what the medical board want from us, to get more feedback, to get more information about how we're doing our jobs, and to reflect on that.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add into that is depending on, as a locum, you may have a department that you have a good relationship with. Have you worked there previously, or have you worked at a locum multiple times? Potentially, if you do have good relationship with the head of the department there, go to them and say, hey, I'm looking to further my CPD. Is there anything sitting on your desk, an audit that needs doing? I'm happy to do some of the legwork in exchange for getting some hours up. That is one way you can kind of get around that. Otherwise, as Todd said, you're probably more looking at the, maybe things at the individual level that you could audit across departments. So your procedures, your patient experiences, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. I think that there was one comment in here about breaking the groups down, and I think that's really interesting. It is often a bit daunting to have 150 people on a call and presenting. You can't read people's body language. All of that's quite challenging. And maybe another option would be to have breakout groups, or to potentially have a panel. You might volunteer 4 people to present the case, and 3 who have a particular interest in that area, working as a panel might be another option, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess then you could maybe maybe handpick some characters are going to be pretty friendly and stuff like that to make sure everyone feels good about it.
Yep.
And then someone's mentioned the point of professional indemnity providers potentially being involved. Like, I think, as I said, there's no way to do this completely privately, and so whether we explicitly need to involve them, I don't know, but we do definitely need to have a higher threshold for privacy, and as we've mentioned many times, whether that's substituting information, quote unquote, making up cases for what was a real experience. We need to be red hot on that. I think we've beat the drum on that probably.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and something that I think, if you're at all uncertain, then yes, go and consult your medical indemnity. I think between us, we'll sort of make some inquiries as well so that we've got a rough idea of it. But you should certainly do it yourself. Just one thing on that, there is no way of protecting information that's shared in any environment. There is something called qualified privilege. Some of you may know, probably know more about it than I do. You have to apply for qualified privilege. It's provided by or authorised by the Federal Department of Health. So it's a big deal to get it. And it needs to have a fixed quorum as well, which makes it almost impossible for any meeting to be protected. Effectively, what it does is to protect people from accessing the information, except when it is specifically subpoenaed by the courts.
Yeah.
And so even in the case where people have qualified privilege, information can still be subpoenaed by the courts. So there's no forum that you can discuss any of these things without actually having at risk of being accessed by the courts.
Okay, we're coming up right on 7. I think we've probably hit the main points. Unless you had anything else you wanted to run through, Todd. I think there's some really good ideas coming through. Otherwise,
yeah, I think we've probably squeezed this lemon as hard as we can, Josh, and it's getting close to gin and tonic time. So
absolutely.
But I think it would be great to continue the discussion and the dialogue in the Facebook group that you've set up. I think that's a tremendous idea. Not just for this, but for also sharing other ideas on how you can go about getting your CPD.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
All right. Maybe that's a good note to leave it before Todd goes into anaphylaxis. Thank you so much for everyone who's come along. I'll be in touch by email. I'll sort of write up a bit of a summary of all of this and again, those action items to get the ball rolling. If you've got other questions or ideas, please email us. If you've got experience, Stephanie, or things around psychological safety or any of these spaces, if you've got domain specific knowledge, please share it with us. And we'll be in touch hopefully in the next week or so about what we do next.
There's a exit poll that we would love you to fill in. It'll ask you about best times of the week, best times of the day, whether you'd be interested in participating, all of that sort of stuff. And that would be very helpful to us if you could fill that in when you receive it. I think it comes as an email. Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks very much for your attention, everybody, and for coming along and expressing interest. It's great to see so many people really keen on the idea. So thanks for your contributions, and we'll see you in the Facebook group.
Thanks, guys.